Millions of modern workers willingly trade their baseline biological health for an agonizing 80-hour workweek. Society glorifies this extreme physical and mental output as the ultimate unshakable foundation for generating massive financial wealth. This is a mathematically engineered, highly toxic, and entirely fatal biological trap. This highly evolved neural region demands exactly 20% of all daily human caloric intake just to maintain its baseline function. Extreme work hours and severe sleep deprivation cut this vital fuel supply and recovery process completely. The biological response to this starvation is immediate, violent, and highly devastating to the individual's future. Global corporate machine profits exclusively from this state of mass neurological exhaustion. Elite financial institutions actively suppress the severe clinical data regarding chronic workplace stress and its irreversible impact on human cognition. Relentless daily hustle literally rots the human central nervous system from the inside out. The precise biological mechanism responsible for actively shrinking gray matter is hidden from the general public. The window of opportunity to reverse this severe neurological degradation is closing rapidly today. Ignoring these next clinical minutes guarantees a permanent state of generational financial poverty. Elite financial leverage absolutely requires a naturally dominant, highly recovered, and sharply functioning human brain. Extreme modern hustle actively destroys that exact vital biological hardware. Time is rapidly running out to fix this induced metabolic disaster before the neural damage becomes permanent. The modern hustle culture worships forced, painful daily energy expenditure as a badge of ultimate honor. The working class falsely equates chronic corporate suffering with elite, ironclad discipline. This is a dangerous, highly manufactured illusion designed to keep the masses exhausted and compliant. The human brain manages daily metabolic energy with extreme, uncompromising precision. It requires natural, uninterrupted biological rhythms to function perfectly and process complex abstract variables. Severe daily labor violently disrupts this essential neurological energy supply, throwing the entire organism into a state of physiological panic. When the physical body is pushed past its natural limits, it immediately demands parasympathetic recovery. The brain naturally attempts to slow down the nervous system to repair damaged neural pathways and consolidate memory. Forcing the body to work constantly aggressively overrides this essential evolutionary healing mechanism. The biological tax is immediate. Fluid intelligence drops. Short-term memory fragments completely. Highly disciplined workers secretly suffer from extreme, crushing mental exhaustion every single day of their lives. They look physically busy and highly productive on the outside, but their biological hardware decays rapidly on the inside. This is the dark, unspoken neuroscience of the modern hustle mentality. Exhausted employees constantly hide their overwhelming, chronic daily brain fog to maintain their corporate status. They physically lose the biological capacity to read complex books, analyze market trends, or execute deep, strategic financial work. Their neural pathways are actively burning out from severe overstimulation. Forcing extreme economic output while the body is exhausted destroys the nervous system completely. The biological cost for this vanity is severe, irreversible early-onset neurodegeneration. How extreme hustle fries your prefrontal cortex. The prefrontal cortex is the biological command center that dictates complex human logic, emotional regulation, and massive financial strategy. It is, without question, the absolute most metabolically expensive organ within the human body. The human body forcefully enters an unnatural, permanent catabolic state. Without adequate, high-quality delta-wave sleep, the exhausted brain literally begins to cannibalize its own cellular structures. It desperately hunts for alternative internal fuel sources simply to survive the immediate environmental stress. This brutal mechanism forces billions of delicate neurons to operate in a state of pure, uninterrupted panic. Executive function physically shuts down to save finite metabolic energy for basic respiratory and cardiac survival. Complex financial problem-solving becomes a literal physical biological impossibility under these conditions. The brain intentionally starves its highest cognitive centers to preserve the primitive internal organs. A brutal 80-hour work schedule demands this exact state of systemic biological starvation. This is not a display of elite discipline. This is self-inflicted structural brain damage. Chronic workplace stress accelerates this neural rot at terrifying, compounding speeds. Through the process of synaptic pruning gone wrong, the neural networks literally shrink due to chronic daily overexertion. Inflammation markers, particularly C-reactive proteins, skyrocket across the entire central nervous system immediately following a sustained stress event. The hidden biological cost of a heavy workload is an invisible, silent, and rapid cognitive decline. Every skipped hour of sleep starves the prefrontal cortex further, actively killing the neurons responsible for long-term planning. The panicked brain forcefully redirects human attention toward immediate low-level threats, completely ignoring long-term opportunities. It completely blocks the biological capacity for abstract, long-term strategic thought and asymmetric pattern recognition. Wealth generation requires complex problem-solving, extreme patience, and sustained mental endurance. The starved, physically shrunken prefrontal cortex cannot hold attention on complex financial data for more than a few minutes. The modern 80-hour routine intentionally engineers a weak, docile, easily distracted mind incapable of challenging the system. The worker feels highly productive simply because they completed 50 basic, low-leverage tasks. Meanwhile, their actual cognitive machinery is rusting, breaking down, and actively failing them. The biological trap of working 80 hours. Committing to an 80-hour work week guarantees severe, irreversible biological consequences that extend far beyond simple physical fatigue. Human evolution never designed the fragile nervous system to endure relentless, daily mental trauma and artificial deadlines. Chronic labor forces the autonomic nervous system into permanent sympathetic overdrive, triggering an endless cascade of stress hormones. The physical body remains permanently trapped in a fight-or-flight biological response, misinterpreting emails and meetings as lethal predators. It is constantly fighting a violent, invisible internal biological war that consumes massive amounts of cellular energy. This silent, grinding war destroys the natural human dopamine baseline entirely, leaving the individual numb and unmotivated. Natural ambition evaporates completely under the crushing weight of profound, unyielding biological exhaustion. Executing basic daily discipline requires monumental, exhausting, and highly painful conscious effort because the neurochemical foundation is shattered. The corporate office effectively becomes a daily site of active, compounding biological decay. The central nervous system completely fries under this relentless daily pressure, losing its ability to regulate heart rate variability. Neural pathways literally burn out entirely from chronic, forced overstimulation and a lack of neuroplastic recovery. Extreme workplace discipline rapidly mutates into severe, irreversible biological punishment that guarantees lifelong mediocrity. The exhausted individual falsely believes they are outworking their global competition through sheer brute force. Biologically, they are aggressively inducing early-onset neurodegeneration and a state of chronic, unshakable physical fatigue. The human body attempts to manage this severe psychological trauma by flooding the system with cortisol. Cortisol is highly toxic to delicate, complex human brain cells when sustained over long periods. Chronic heavy labor without adequate parasympathetic recovery creates a lethal, highly corrosive cortisol storm within the bloodstream. The adrenal glands pump this inflammatory stress hormone endlessly into the blood, completely frying the endocrine system. The brain literally marinates in toxic inflammatory cytokines every single day, unable to flush them out. This causes severe, compounding oxidative stress deep within the neural networks, leading to rapid cellular aging. The hidden, fatal danger lies directly in the absolute lack of true biological recovery. The microglia, which act as the essential immune cells of the human brain, begin to aggressively mutate. Under normal physiological conditions, they quietly clean metabolic waste and dead cellular matter from delicate neurons. However, chronic workplace stress forcefully alters the microglia's biological behavior, turning them into hostile agents. They become hyperactive, aggressive, and highly destructive immune cells entirely out of control. Instead of cleaning the brain, they start actively attacking and eating perfectly healthy neurons. This is severe neuroinflammation driven directly by the toxic ideology of the modern hustle culture. Why chronic stress destroys financial strategy. True generational wealth requires asymmetric leverage, deep strategic thinking, and the ability to spot highly complex market anomalies. A chronically stressed brain physically cannot process complex financial leverage mathematically or logically. The exhausted mind operates purely in a primitive limbic survival mode, completely controlled by the amygdala. It only thinks about paying immediate bills, avoiding immediate pain, and surviving the current workday. A fried nervous system completely blocks long-term pattern recognition entirely, rendering the individual blind to massive economic shifts. This explains why the absolute hardest working people often remain in severe financial poverty their entire lives. They simply trade their finite, irreplaceable biological time for devalued fiat currency because their brain cannot formulate a better strategy. Conversely, the overstimulated, exhausted brain processes basic data through thick biological mud, constantly dropping crucial details. This clearly explains the secret, silent depression lurking directly behind the extreme hustle culture. These heavily burdened workers possess zero biological energy for genuine joy, boundless creativity, or massive strategic ambition. Chronic workplace stress is a direct, fully paved path to modern intellectual and economic poverty. The biological hardware simply refuses to run high-level financial software because the internal environment is too volatile. The hippocampus, the brain center directly responsible for memory consolidation and emotional regulation, shrinks rapidly under high cortisol. Learning new, complex leverage skills, like coding, investing, or system building, becomes a literal physical biological impossibility. Exhausted men regularly forget basic vocabulary, struggle to articulate simple concepts, and fail to negotiate powerful, life-changing deals. They absolutely cannot maintain deep strategic focus because their attention span has been violently shattered. Brain is entirely too busy managing the violent internal chemical storm to care about building a financial empire. Toxic metabolic byproducts from chronic stress accumulate rapidly inside the human skull every single waking hour. The lymphatic system, responsible for flushing these toxins out of the brain, completely shuts down during periods of high stress. It only operates properly during deep, restorative, high-quality human delta sleep, which the hustler actively avoids. The 80-hour work week violently destroys deep sleep architecture and essential delta wave production. The brain never fully cleans itself of the toxic metabolic waste, creating an environment of severe neurotoxicity. This guarantees chronic, compounding, and highly destructive daily brain fog that cripples all high-level executive function. The hardworking employee cannot compete in the modern intellectual arena against a well-rested, highly optimized elite performer. The hidden cost of fake productivity. Modern hustle culture universally worships the grand illusion of constant, frantic daily motion over actual leverage. Society falsely equates frantic multitasking and endless checklists with elite, highly effective economic discipline. This is a highly dangerous, carefully manufactured, and deeply toxic biological illusion designed to keep workers busy but poor. The individual starts blindly chasing fake productivity rather than actually building sustainable, asymmetric financial leverage. This artificially decouples the dopamine motivation system from actual, difficult, and highly profitable economic achievement entirely. Constantly checking emails, responding to Slack messages, and ticking off small boxes creates cheap, artificial dopamine spikes. The fragile human brain rapidly becomes heavily addicted to this violent, unnatural chemical reward system. Over time, the central nervous system detects this toxic overstimulation and initiates a protective protocol. To survive the daily chemical flood of cheap stimulation, the brain executes a process called biological downregulation. It actively destroys its own dopamine receptors to reduce the chaotic noise and protect the underlying neural tissue. This is a terrifying, highly permanent biological defense mechanism that radically alters the individual's personality and drive. The highly disciplined, constantly busy worker literally loses the biological capacity to focus deeply on a single profound task. Dopamine receptors require abundant metabolic energy and absolute physiological calm to synthesize and bind properly. Chronic sympathetic stress completely blocks this entire delicate neurochemical process from happening naturally. The individual completes their 50 daily tasks perfectly, but they feel completely dead, hollow, and numb inside. They suffer from severe, clinically induced limbic anhedonia, the total inability to feel pleasure every single day. The pleasure and motivation centers of the brain physically shut down entirely to conserve energy. Natural, unforced motivation evaporates completely from their daily human experience, leaving behind a cold, robotic shell. Basic, daily corporate tasks suddenly require monumental, exhausting, and highly painful conscious effort just to initiate. They become biologically dependent on cheap urgency and artificial deadlines just to feel a fleeting sense of productivity. Without a highly stressful external demand, they cannot gather the internal energy to function. They achieve their basic corporate goals flawlessly but become biological slaves to the system that is destroying them. This is severe limbic depression, engineered directly by the toxic hustle mentality and praised by the modern world. The aesthetic goal of simply being busy becomes an inescapable, miserable, and highly destructive neurological prison. Multitasking actively destroys the myelin sheath insulating the vital neural pathways, causing electrical signals to slow down dramatically. The ultimate biological cost of fake productivity is the complete and total fragmentation of human attention. How the elite use leverage instead of hard work. Reclaiming absolute cognitive dominance requires completely and violently abandoning the modern toxic hustle illusion forever. The true global elite optimize their entire existence solely for maximum neural horsepower, never for endless physical labor. They absolutely refuse to trade their biological vitality and cognitive longevity for a basic, highly taxed hourly wage. The human brain absolutely requires deep, unshakable biological calm to function brilliantly and flawlessly at the highest levels. Returning to a natural, highly stable biological baseline is absolutely mandatory immediately to halt the cognitive decay. This targeted rest protocol stops the violent neural inflammation and halts the destructive microglial attacks instantly. Chronic physical labor and unnecessary microtasks must be eliminated entirely to reduce toxic daily cortisol spikes. The vagus nerve must be activated daily through stillness to enter deep, restorative parasympathetic recovery. This rapidly and efficiently flushes toxic metabolic waste completely from the fragile neural pathways, restoring cognitive clarity. Elite executive function returns rapidly once the artificial exhaustion and chronic cellular starvation finally end. The prefrontal cortex physically expands back to its optimal, powerful, and highly dominant biological size. Deep strategic focus becomes entirely frictionless, automatic, highly sustainable, and incredibly sharp against the competition. Memory retention sharpens immediately to elite, highly competitive global financial standards, allowing for massive data processing. The modern human being must deliberately choose today between a life of endless labor or absolute cognitive supremacy. The highest global earners always prioritize the protection of their central nervous system infinitely above working hard. True modern power is strictly mental, highly strategic, deeply leveraged, and never relies on brute physical force. Rebuilding the shattered dopamine baseline requires totally abandoning the extreme hustle cult and its toxic dogmas. It requires treating the human brain like an elite, highly protected biological sanctuary that demands the highest quality inputs. This clinical breakdown firmly sets the required theoretical foundation for elite biological recovery and massive wealth generation. However, theoretical knowledge without exact, aggressive tactical execution guarantees absolute, mathematically certain failure. The exact, step-by-step clinical resources required to biologically rebuild these specific neural pathways exist right now. The massive corporate system actively tries to suppress this specific recovery data entirely to maintain a highly compliant, exhausted workforce. They are located directly in the description below this video right now. Go to the description immediately and access these elite optimization protocols today before the algorithm removes them. Applying these specific clinical resources guarantees the reclamation of lost cognitive dominance entirely and permanently. This eliminates adrenal fatigue fundamentally and completely bypasses the exhausted, distracted global competition. Subscribe to this channel immediately to join the absolute minority operating at peak biological and financial performance. Stop trading human cognitive longevity for a fake, highly toxic daily hustle mentality that guarantees long-term poverty. The critical window of opportunity to reverse the specific neural damage is closing extremely fast. Reclaim the shattered nervous system today before the biological damage becomes permanent and irreversible.